Welcome to KendalKids at Home, and today we're going to be hearing the next part of our story about Jacob and how God started to fulfill some of the promises that he had given to Jacob in that really weird dream that he had last week. Can you remember what God promised Jacob? He promised him special land, a special blessing, protection, and a big family. But before we read our story today, let's take a quick look at Jacob's family tree. Now we're going to go back a few generations and see how God not only promised Jacob, but also gave similar promises to Jacob's dad and to his granddad as well. First of all, we have Abraham and Sarah. God had also given Abraham some promises. In Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3, God told Abraham, "I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you." Now, Abraham and Sarah had a son called Isaac, and he married a girl called Rebecca. The promises that God had given Abraham were for Isaac too. Last week we heard how Isaac and Rebecca had twin boys, Esau and Jacob. When Esau gave up his birthright for a pot of stew, it meant that Jacob would get all the blessings that God had promised. And one day, God would send Jesus to earth through Jacob's family. Now, you can read the whole story of Jacob's family in Genesis chapter 29 and 30. Now, can you remember what Jacob's name meant? Something a bit like cheat or deceiver. And we've heard, haven't we, how Jacob tricked his brother Esau not once but twice. First of all, out of his birthright or inheritance, but also out of God's special blessing. Today we're going to be hearing how Jacob got his just desserts when someone tricked him. Today's story is going to be from the Jesus Storybook Bible. The girl no one wanted. There were once two sisters. The youngest sister was very beautiful and her name was Rachel. But the oldest sister wasn't beautiful at all. In fact, some thought she was quite ugly. And her name was Leah. Rachel was the kind of girl who always got invited to parties and chosen for the sports teams. Everyone loved her. And poor Leah? No one hardly even noticed her. One day, their cousin Jacob came to stay. He was one of Isaac's sons and he was on the run. Jacob had stolen and cheated and made some enemies, including his own brother. And now he was hiding. The funny thing is that Jacob, of all people, was the one that God gave the special promise to. The same promise that he had given his grandfather Abraham. "I will rescue the world through your family." But then God chooses people that we least expect, as we'll see. Jacob stayed a long time working for his uncle Laban. And one day Laban said, "What do you want?" A sudden thought struck him. "How about one of my daughters?" Jacob looked at Rachel. And then he looked at Leah. Who do you think he would choose? Of course he chose Rachel. "I'll work 7 years for free," Jacob said, "if I can marry Rachel." So Jacob worked 7 years and at last his wedding day came. But that night, Laban played a nasty trick on Jacob. Instead of sending Rachel to marry Jacob, he sent Leah. Now, in those days, they didn't have electricity, so it was dark in their tent, and besides, people wore veils and you couldn't see their faces properly. So Jacob suspected nothing. The next morning, Jacob woke up and screamed. His new wife was lying beside him, and it wasn't Rachel, it was Leah. Jacob jumped out of bed. "Laban!" he called. "You scoundrel!" But Laban said, "Work for me for another 7 years and then you can marry Rachel." So Jacob worked for Laban another 7 years, and at last Rachel became his wife. Now Jacob had 2 wives, but of his 2 wives, Jacob loved Rachel the best. "No one loves me," Leah said. "I'm too ugly." But God didn't think that she was ugly. And when he saw that Leah was not loved and that no one wanted her, God chose her, to love her specially, to give her a very important job. One day, God was going to rescue the whole world through Leah's family. Now, when Leah knew that God loved her, in her heart, suddenly it didn't matter anymore whether her husband loved her the best or if she was the prettiest. Someone had chosen her. Someone did love her with a never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. So, when Leah had a baby boy, she called him Judah, which means, "This time I will praise the Lord." And that's just what she did. And you'll never guess what job God gave Leah. You see, when God looked at Leah, he saw a princess. And sure enough, that's exactly what she became. One of Leah's children's children would be a prince, the Prince of Heaven, God's son. This prince would love God's people. They wouldn't need to be beautiful for him to love them. He would love them with all of his heart, and they would be beautiful because he loved them, just like Leah. I wonder if you can answer these questions about the story today. Who tricked Jacob? How did he cheat Jacob? Did this affect God's promises to Jacob? In this story, we see that God keeps his promises. God protected Jacob, bringing him safely to his uncle Laban's house. And we hear how Jacob ended up having 2 wives as well as 2 other mums for all of his children. This is the start of a very big family. And if you read the story in the Bible, you will also find out how God blessed Jacob, not just with a big family, but with lots of possessions, in particular, lots of sheep and goats. Let's carry on with the family tree. Jacob married Leah, then Rachel, and he also had children with 2 other women, Bilhah and Zilpah. And here are their children. We're going to have a go at learning a memory verse. And it says this: "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails." And that comes from Proverbs 19 verse 21. In other words, people might make many plans, but only God's plans work forever. Let's see if we can say the memory verse using a rhythm. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but It is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Proverbs 19:21. Should we try it again? Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Proverbs 19:21. Families are really important, aren't they? Today, we're going to have a go at making a special family prayer tree. You're going to need some paper, and I've basically cut out some shapes of people I just drew round a cookie cutter. So you're going to need to cut out some shapes of the people that you want to have in your family. I have written their names on the back of them, and then you're going to need either some branches from a tree, or you could use a mug tree if you wanted to. And all I've done is I've put some of my family onto the mug tree. So I've got Timmy and David, they're two of my nephews. I've got Grampy, that's my dad. I've got Auntie Julie and Uncle Eugene. They're some of our relatives in South Africa. And then you can add all the people in your family. I've got Pedro here. So I think I'm going to add him to the family tree. Let's put him on there. And then every time you walk past your tree, you can pray for somebody in your family. Next week is going to be the last in our series about Jacob, and we're going to be finding out what happens when he goes back home and meets his brother Esau face to face. See you next week.